into a 40-year analysis, it found that 22% of all serial killings are sex workers. To understand a bit more about this disturbing issue, I now want to bring in Joseph Giacalone, a former NYPD police detective. He's also an investigations expert. Thanks so much for joining the show this morning, Joseph. We sure do appreciate you here on Live Now from Fox.
Thanks for having me, Jacqueline.
Well, let's get right into it. I do want to first off ask, why are sex workers targeted?
Well, unfortunately, they're too available for certain people within our society, right? So they're transient. They move around a lot. They tend to get into cars. They tend to meet people at locations that are not to their best security. And these are the kind of things that opportunists take advantage of. And unfortunately, we've seen many serial killings throughout the history target this group because of those reasons. And there are probably other reasons too, because sometimes these women are engaged in drug activity. They might be hard up on their luck. There might be mental health issues and everything else that goes along with it. And, criminals are opportunists, and, they look for that weakness and then they exploit it.
Is there also a bit of a perspective that perhaps police may be less likely to respond to the areas where things like sex work or prostitution or drug use is more prevalent?
Well, I don't think it's so much the latter, right? So I don't think it's that the police aren't engaged in those kinds of policing activities. But for many years, the police have been kind of maligned that they don't take these cases seriously. And that was those were allegations that were actually made about Suffolk County Police Department at the time during the initial stages of this investigation. There was a couple of things that were even public statements that were made, not just by the police, but by many other people involved in these things. So when you have a group that gets marginalized like that, if they don't get treated as if they're ordinary persons who have become victim of a crime, we need to have that victimization and that central thought that the police have to make sure that these cases are just as important as everything else. And it is something that has been an accusation, not just on Long Island, but in many jurisdictions throughout the United States, and it's a shame.
Yeah, and of course, on the other hand, we are seeing 3 arrests being made this week in cases that are connected to those serial killings, potential serial killings, as officials have suspected, obviously showing that police are clearly working certain cases because, of course, at least these 3 we've mentioned involving sex workers and arrests were made. But of course, there are some other issues that I want to kind of get into with this. How does the role of criminalization of sex work, prostitution kind of play into this in terms of reporting and other things like that?
Well, I mean, this is what the public debate is going to come forward again. I mean, it's been there before, but I think with all these cases that have come public now, I think it's going to be front and center. There are a lot of people out there that want to legalize this and be able to control it or have the state run it. I'm not a big fan of the state running anything because once they get involved in something, they end up taxing it and everything else, and they end up taxing it out and creating a larger black market than there was before. I think we're seeing that with marijuana right now. So we need to be very careful. Can something be done? Sure. I mean, we can look at some places where prostitution is legal, places, in Las Vegas, for instance. But you have to understand that there are still going to be people who are going to want to be, for lack of a better term, entrepreneurs and do their own thing and make their own money and not have to pay the middleman or pay for security and everything else. I don't think there's any way to make this safe for anybody. Not only for the, putting them vulnerable for serial killers, but also in regards to the health issues down the road.
Now, from an investigative side, are these crimes more challenging to bust? Are these things that take a little bit more time to really work on to get the, necessary facts and information to make arrests?
Well, in regards, you were talking about serial killings and this cohort of individuals, yes, because generally you have people that are working in this industry. They don't trust the police. They don't want to get involved with the police, and they don't want to give out information. So that becomes a big problem. The police need information from the public. It's just something that has to happen. And when you're dealing with situations such as Gilgo, and you saw much of it happened online, makes it even more difficult, right? So We have situations where women who are doing this and men who are doing this are using the internet and social media in order to put their services out there. And that makes it extremely difficult for the police to get information and get involved in some of these things because, warrants will be involved and the like. And it just becomes a huge administrative undertaking.
Something that we are starting to see, obviously, in this Gilgo Beach killings, the investigators, they're saying that their work is far, far, far from over in that case. Of course, a lot of information that they're going to have to get and a lot of investigative work that'll have to be done. In terms of these types of cases and investigating them or trying to perhaps break up these potential crimes, is there anything that police do specifically to kind of focus on that type of area in terms of sex work and in terms of drugs?
Well, yes, you try to understand that the hotspot policing aspect of things and the way that mapping has come out and being able to have investigators who will be able to cull information out of things. A lot of times we discovered cases and patterns just because we were going through complaint reports and looking at different cases and being able to then try to map these things out and look at it as a whole. Because sometimes you might find that one or two similarities that you're looking for that create a pattern. So the other part, law enforcement always refers to these things as patterns and not serial killings because of the fact that that word tends to draw a lot of media attention and, of course, public attention and scrutiny. But, it's about the quality of the investigation. It's about situations such as what we saw what happened in Suffolk County, where you have to create a task force. And within that task force, you have to have great leadership. And when we saw the Suffolk County Commissioner, Rodney Harrison, be able to put this together, bring in the state police, bring the FBI back in, all of those working parts. There's a big situation that's happening out in Portland right now, where there is a man who was a suspect in 4 deaths. So this was one huge week for law enforcement and breaking a lot of these cases. And it's absolutely interesting to see how some of the new forensic technologies are going to help. And good quality investigators and investigations at the end of the day is what's going to help solve these cases.
Is there a lot more you think that can be learned from these cases and from the investigations that broke this week?
Well, yes, specifically in Gilgo, right? So we see how a set of fresh eyes can come into a cold case and be able to look into it and invigorate it just because somebody picked something up that was either missed or forgotten about, or and some people like to use is just ignored. And then you have a situation where you take that little tidbit of information and you can conflate it into with the cases that we see now. And we're talking about a description of somebody, a description of a vehicle, and then the kind of the pieces of the puzzle just started coming together for the investigators out in Suffolk.
All right, there, Joseph Giacalone, a criminal investigations expert, joining us this morning from New York. Anything I didn't ask you, Joseph? Anything you'd like to add?
No, I think right now for Suffolk, the idea is putting that fourth piece of the Gilgo 4 together, the Maureen Brainerd Barnes case, and then looking at the other 6 or 7 cases that could be attributed to whomever maybe is the suspect they have now, but they have a lot of work to do, and using some of that forensic technology, I think, is going to be very interesting, including trying to identify the couple of last victims who are unidentified still at this moment.